Chair, and it's absolutely great to be here. I should say that I'm number 3 on the Labour list for the MEP elections in April next year. And just to tell you a bit about me, I was a Labour councillor in Kentish Town. I worked for Ken Livingstone in City Hall, and I've been firmly committed to the left on the Labour Party and beyond for the last 20 years and active in London politics. And I completely agree with what Owen and what Andy said about the need for a mass popular movement in London and beyond to tackle what we're having to deal with. It is an absolute disgrace. It breaks my heart to see what's happening in London now in terms of the impact of the benefit cuts, what Boris Johnson is doing in City Hall, what people everywhere are telling me when we go out on the streets talking to people every weekend, what they're having to face in terms of the bedroom tax, and the rising prices, the rising fares, the no childcare, everything that people are facing in London today. It's not being addressed properly. So I just wanted to go through a number of themes, and bear with me. I think I've only got about 8 minutes, but I'll try and stick to time. And firstly, I'm just going to tell you a bit more about why it's important that we won the Labour selection in terms of what happened with the MEP elections. Secondly, I'm going to say something about why austerity isn't working. All of you know this, but it's important to look at some of the recent examples. Thirdly, I'm going to look a bit more about the impact on Londoners. You won't be surprised to have a bit of a Euro perspective. I know that being part of the European Union isn't always popular on the left, but I stood because it was really important that we have left Socialist and Greene and good candidates who can do those key votes in the European Parliament for as long as we're there. And then I'm going to talk a bit about a positive agenda for what we can do practically and campaigning-wise to deal with the appalling things that capitalism is doing in London and more widely. So firstly, in terms of the selections, and thank you to anyone who's a Labour member in this audience who voted for me, because I was the left candidate and I won. And I won because of everything that was done by the trade unions, by the wider left in the Labour Party, by the co-op people, and we came together and we made sure that the London Labour Party membership understood how important it was that we had a left candidate at the top of the new candidates list. Now, that doesn't mean I'll necessarily be elected, because there are 2 sitting MEPs above me, and so I'm number 3 on the list, and it is by no means certain I will get to be there. I didn't put myself forward because I needed some fancy job. I work for the NUT, I'm very happy with my job. I really felt how crucial it was to fight for employment rights, environmental rights, and to make the case for socialism in Europe, and for standing up with the oppressed people of Greece and Cyprus who had austerity imposed on them in, frankly, what was a very undemocratic and breach of European law, because there were no legal powers to allow what was done to those people in Greece and Cyprus. And if we have more of a majority in the European Parliament of socialists and of the left, we may be able to stop that. So please think about how that's all going in terms of the elections and the run-up and what happens in April next year in London. So why austerity isn't working? Well, you know this, and Osborne was delighted yesterday about all of these supposed growth in GDP. How is that making its way down to ordinary people? It absolutely isn't. There's no evidence that it is. And the figures, this very small growth, it's in the service sector, it's at the expense of people's wages and conditions, and it is an absolute mirage. Yes, it's good that the economy isn't shrinking, but it is incredibly bad what is behind all of that, and particularly, as Ken often says, the total lack of investment in infrastructure, jobs and growth. And none of that money is being made available. It fell off a cliff in 2008, and we as the Labour Party are guilty of this too. I hold my hands up. We were investing, but not nearly to the level that was needed. And then in 2008, investment fell off a cliff. The Fabians, who are not known often for their radical points on this, made this point very strongly in an article yesterday. It is incredibly important that an incoming Labour government or incoming progressives in any situation of power consistently make the case for investment in transport, housing, jobs and growth. And I would do that if I had the chance. I mean, secondly, in London, it is a disgrace what's happening on housing. And it is really, really important that we tackle that at every conceivable level. And there are very good colleagues on the London Assembly, Greene and Labour in particular, who are making these arguments and sticking together. London is being bought up by foreign investors, billionaires such as those that Owen talked about. And ordinary people are being priced out at every single conceivable level. And it means that Labour councils who are trying to put money into housing aren't actually able to deliver on those policies. Boris Johnson has planning targets which disincentivise social housing. What he just deems affordable is in no way, shape or form affordable. Shelter this week came out did some very good research showing that they looked at a snapshot of every single possible housing option available currently, and they found that only 613 homes in the whole of London were on the market affordable to young families with children. I mean, in a developed industrial economy with huge wealth, that is absolutely shocking. And in terms of housing, we could afford to put the investment into housing that we need to do. Even the GLA official research shows that the gap between rich and poor has grown. I mean, they've buried it deep on the website, but it's there. And then, thirdly, the total scandal of the benefits cuts and the bedroom tax, particularly in London, because we know how it works in terms of the level of what is supposedly the rent that they allocate. And thankfully, Ed Miliband has said we will repeal that if we get back into government, and we need to make sure the Labour Party 100% sticks to that, as well as reversing as much as possible of all the other cuts that we want to do something about. And they need to be pressured on that consistently and in every possible forum. And then thirdly, just the general fourthly, the general framework of how we tackle the banks and what's happened more. And again, I'm very, very upset this week, and I'm sure other colleagues are as well, about what's happened with the Co-op Bank. Because the Co-op Bank has been taken over by hedge funds. I mean, I've been an active member of the London Co-op Party for years. I'm on the London Co-op Council. We weren't consulted about this. It has just happened, and there is actually a big revolt within the Co-op Party going on at the moment about this. I don't know if there's anything we can do, but if there's anything you can do, and you know people who are talking about this, please get involved. So there's just some issues about austerity, and you know all this stuff, but it is worth pointing out how grim the situation is. And I come at it very much from a London perspective, but I'm unapologetic about that because I'm a London candidate and I want to make things better for Londoners. And in addition to what I've mentioned, also impact on poverty generally, massive increase in food bank usage. Fare rises mean that people can't afford to get to work. Next month, TfL should be announcing the fare rises, and we need to keep the pressure on that because they've upped the bus fares, and most Londoners on lower incomes rely on the buses. It's gone up 50% since 2010, and watch out for it because I think they're going to try and put them up next month as well, and there needs to be a complete public outcry about it. Housing, I've talked about, benefit cuts, childcare costs. Childcare costs, even 5 years ago, were the most expensive in the Western world, virtually. They are now worse than that. So, and in terms of involving women in the labour market, making sure that women aren't discriminated against. And then, in addition to that, the scapegoating, I'm running out of time, so I will really speed up. The scapegoating of immigrants is something that, particularly as a European candidate, I feel really, really strongly about. The European Commission called the government out on this a couple of weeks ago. They said, excuse me, not only is there not evidence that people from other countries, or non-European countries, are abusing the benefit system here, supposedly, you have absolutely zero evidence that people from other EU countries, Bulgarians, Romanians, whoever they are actually abusing the UK benefit system. And in fact, there are lots of UK residents who quite rightly take advantage of those rights overseas. So, just a bit more on European-wide solidarity. I mean, I've said it is a really important platform to stand up for oppressed workers and citizens in other countries. So that's one of the main reasons I'm doing it. And the ETUC has been pushing consistently on a European budget for jobs and growth. In fact, the Labour MEPs did vote against the budget this week because they also agreed that the allocation of spending within the budget, yes, there's been a slight cut to the budget, the European budget, but the allocation towards sustainable jobs, green jobs and workers was not there. So if we had more of a majority, we could do more about that. And then other things that we can do to tame capitalism, and tougher regulation and big fines. If we can't, at this stage, renationalise everything, at least we need tougher regulation, like they have in America. It may not be enough, but JP Morgan have just been fined £6 billion. In this country, nothing like that happens. The Serious Fraud Office have ridiculously low powers, ridiculously low resources. Corporate fraud is not taken on as a proper issue. Massive housing investment, I will wind up, massive housing investment I talked about, and tackling energy companies. And leaving aside energy generally, water is the most extreme example of something that absolutely has to be renationalised immediately. And I, as the Labour representative, will be pushing the front bench to renationalise water. Water was renationalised in Paris, and they made huge savings, and they've got a much better service. There is no excuse for not renationalising water. So I will leave you with that, as well as issues to do with top rate of tax needs to go up, Robin Hood tax needs to be done. So thank you very much for listening. I could say so much more, but let's get out there and make this change.